Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am finally getting around to building something from Stargate. I've kind of talked about it for a while, and one of the actual first things I built on my Glowforge was a little Stargate to go around the push button. So I am a big fan. I've watched it several times all the way through. A lot of times when I'm building, that's what I put on in the background. It's a good cheesy sci-fi 90s show with like the guy from MacGyver of all people.
For crying out loud.
Makes it pretty epic, and I really enjoy the different scenarios that they go into, and I was looking for something relatively small to try and build because a lot of the things in there are Egyptian inspired. They are very elaborate. The headpieces that some of the enemies wear in the show, the gate, all of those would be super cool. The guns that they use would definitely be on the list. The staff of some of the Jaffa. I wanted to build all of those things at some point and just haven't got around to it for some reason. So today I thought I would start with something relatively small. I mean, it'll be about an inch. Yeah. And then they'll continue to get more and more and more. I'm talking about the Replicators. In SG1, they are an alien race that is trying to take over the universe, the galaxy, everything by eating up technology and incorporating it in to make more of itself. Yeah. And they all kind of start with these tiny little, almost puzzle piece looking items. So I'm going to cut them on my laser engraver, my Glowforge, and then glue all of it together and figure it out as I go. So today we are building a replicator from SG1. Fingers crossed I don't ruin the galaxy. Let's get to building. I apologize for the shakiness. I'm trying to record with one hand and do computer stuff with the other. I didn't want to have to try and put together the screen capture stuff. I went in and drew a single replicator in Microsoft Paint, converted it to an SVG, and then made loads of copies on my Glowforge app. On the screen initially I had 100, so for my first burn it took about 2 hours to cut all of them. It even took a couple of minutes for the software to mock up the configuration of the pathways, which normally it doesn't take that long. Eventually I was able to hit print. In my machine, I have 4mm extremely high density foam. The engraving will only be on one side of the pieces, unlike the actual blocks, which I believe they had cast metal practical props, as well as a majority of them being computer generated for animations. In total for this build, I made 520 replicator blocks, with only 8 of them not being used. This was done in 4 batches. After my first run, I was able to cram 140 on the sheet. My last batch I did, I flipped the pattern to give me some left-sided pieces also. It doesn't look like much, but this is about half of the replicator blocks I used for the build. The other half are still burning on the laser cutter. I do not have a blueprint for this. There were various people out there that made them out of different materials, and not too many of them had detailed photos of their process, which I guess is good for humanity, but not so helpful for a prop maker trying to make a pretend replica. I found a 3D model someone made on Sketchfab and used this as the general idea of how big I wanted parts to be. The blocks are arranged in different manners to make the different parts. I'm just going to use some super glue and go piece by piece like a puzzle. I start with the legs. Believe it or not, it only took 1.5 bottles of super glue to do the entire replicator. Also note, this will be the cleanest my hands are due to the soot from the laser cutter and the super glue. So initially I thought the foam was sturdy enough to be doubled up and hold its own shape. This is a bit of foreshadowing that future Thomas will take care of later. For now, I'm going to build the 4 legs of the alien. It takes approximately 34 in at least this shot for my first calculation. Later I'll add an additional 15 to each leg for a total of 59 per leg. Figuring out the part layouts, positioning, and supports took me a while, pretty much up until the end before I painted. The basic building strategy stayed the same though. I lay out how I want it to look and then super glue the pieces together in strips, then glue those together. To support with a second or third layer, I contact cemented those together because there's a bigger surface area. The front and back legs are the same size, just positioned differently. Here I am trying to figure out the main body layout. Notice the pieces are glued tip to tip on the small tabs with a gap in the middle. This gives a nice slight slant to the structure. I ended up adding an extra row to each column later on, but it's the basic structure. It was at this point I realized I needed inverted blocks to make the other side, so a majority of the blocks I've already cut out. There are 380 right facing. The last 140 that my laser cutter will cut will be left-sided, so I just inverted it. If I did it again, I'd probably do them half and half. The only real area that I need them for is the head and body. To reinforce the underside, but not have to use so many of the parts, I made individual strips to glue in the middle of every other seam. This will help support it a little and give a little bit of the pattern to the bottom side, which most people aren't going to see if it's sitting on a shelf. The legs and the middle supports will make the main body a lot more rigid later, which I'll figure out in the next step, hopefully. This is a majority of all the parts now ready to assemble. It has taken me several hours to get to this point. Keep in mind that I'm still trying to figure this out as I go. Once I get the main body assembled, I can figure out how the legs and the other parts will be positioned. So, the middle of the alien has a main support that I am going to make out of 4 layers of strips, gluing them together. The middle 2 are going to be slightly higher than the outside 2. This will give the body panels a angle to meet at. I super glue it to hold them in place, then reinforce the mess out of them with hot glue. I did this in the middle and on the leg joints eventually. Another 4-layer strip goes on the top of the body panel to allow for what I'm going to refer to as the head. I don't really know what all these parts are. It's just panels on top of panels with other panels below it. They are smaller and laying next to the legs if you look. There are 18 for each side on these, or at least mine are, with no supports. The smaller area will get glued to the center post, while the outer, longer edge will be glued to the main body. Now I'm trying to decide the angle I want the legs to meet the middle support columns for underneath. Notice these strips are glued smaller tabs together with no gap in the middle. This means that they are even on the sides, which will increase the surface area and help to support the body theoretically. I'm sure none of my build is screen accurate, but with the thought that they are made up of blocks, any configuration could be possible. Maybe mine's just the wonky cousin that isn't quite right. I get my front two in a similar position and glue them on, then do the same for the back but at a different angle so that my stance of my replicator is slightly tilted forward. It is here that I realize my replicator, much like Forrest Gump, will not walk right without corrective bracing. So my solution is to pull off the joints at the knees and a little bit under the structure, burn a channel in with my wood burner, and then shove fencing wire in and patch everything back up. Notice all the fumes kicking off of this wood burner. Definitely wear a respirator and work in a well ventilated area. It's not just melting foam, that's also super glue and contact cement being burned into the air. Once the channel is burned, I wedge it in and glue the layers around it. It was as simple as putting a sweater on a cat. Eventually the foam stopped fighting me and I was able to cover everything up. Now for 2 coats of Plasti Dip. Final paint, I just slightly misted on some silver, brown, and black spray paint and called it done. And we are finished. Here is the end result. I love the way this thing turned out. It is super cool. I didn't know that it would be as unstable as it was. Now, I kind of had an idea. I also thought about making it out of wood, but then therein lies some more problems with foam. At least it's easy to glue together, and my Glowforge can cut it pretty easy. The only problem is stability, and solving that problem at the end, probably I should have gone ahead and put wires in the legs because I knew that that was going to be the issue, but the body itself actually holds up well with the little pieces that support the underside. Maybe the prop makers who did this in the actual series thought of that for me already. But yeah, maybe you will try and make a replicator yourself and impress your friends with your ability to make a machine that makes versions of itself and then takes over the planet and the solar system and the galaxy. Yeah. Maybe you'll get some.
Yay!
And inevitably, they're gonna ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these, tell them, much props. I'm gonna go put this in a protective case so that it can't spit acid at me. Peace out. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and want to continue to see builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.